Good evening, welcome to Scotland at 7 with me, Gordon Ross. It's the 29th of June today. Joining me in the studio to discuss today's news headlines is my friend and colleague Brian Liddy. Welcome to the hot seat, Brian.
Thank you.
And we'll be discussing today's news just presently. But first of all, the coronavirus update. And as of 2 o'clock today, a total of 2,238,776 people in Scotland have been tested through NHS Scotland labs and the UK Government regional testing centres since the start of the pandemic. Of these, 1,961,441 have been confirmed negative. 277,335 have tested positive. There are 3,118 new cases of COVID-19 confirmed by a test. Although not everyone with the virus will display the symptoms, and not all those with symptoms will be tested. There is one new reported death today of a person who tested positive. The number of patients in Scotland who've now died from complications caused by the coronavirus COVID-19 infection now stands at 7,713. The number only includes those who have died having received a positive test for the virus in the previous 28 days. Of the people who have tested positive, 215 were in hospital last night, 20 of whom were in intensive care. And as of 8 o'clock this morning, 3,781,887 people have received their first dose of the COVID-19 vaccination, and 2,701,195 had received their second dose. The latest UK daily figures show that 128,126 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, an increase of 23 since yesterday. And this number refers, of course, to deaths in all settings and not just in hospitals. And now for the ONS update. The percentage of people testing positive increased in England and Scotland in the week ending the 19th of June. Trends are uncertain in Wales and Northern Ireland in the latest week. And hospital admissions for COVID-19 confirmed patients in England increased in the week ending the 20th of June. The number of registered deaths involving COVID-19 in England and Wales increased in the week ending June the 18th. There were 102 deaths involving coronavirus COVID-19 registered in the week ending the 18th of June in England and Wales, accounting for 1.1% of all deaths that week. In May, mortality rates due to COVID-19 decreased for the fourth consecutive month in both England and Wales. The proportion of deaths involving COVID-19 has decreased in those aged 75 years and over since January, likely reflecting age prioritisation in the vaccination programme. Now to tonight's main headlines, and COVID cases have reached their highest in males between the ages of 18 and 40. Commenting this morning, the Health Secretary Hamza Yousaf suggested that there appeared to be a link between the high numbers of new COVID cases occurring in Scotland and football supporters watching Euro 2020 matches. I think that should be 2021 matches, but never mind. Okay, it is 2020, I beg your pardon, I have been corrected. Okay, I am corrected. Anyway, speaking at her COVID briefing this afternoon, the First Minister said that she's confident that vaccines will win the race with the virus, as they have shown that fewer people are being admitted to hospital and there are fewer deaths. However, Ms Sturgeon did warn that the virus is currently running faster than it has ever done before, with the Delta variant accounting for the majority of new cases. This variant is significantly more transmissible than previous variants, which are driving a steep rise in cases. On the prospect of relaxing restrictions, Nicola Sturgeon said, that's why, notwithstanding this increase in cases that we're now seeing just now, and obviously bearing in mind that we do have to keep this under review as we always have done, we do remain hopeful that we will be able to continue lifting restrictions, first on July the 19th and ultimately on August the 9th. The Scottish Government still hopes that all of Scotland will move to level 0 on July the 19th, with all remaining legal restrictions to be lifted from August the 9th. It's a bit of a mixed bag tonight, isn't it, Brian? The cases are still rising, but the hospitalisations and the deaths from COVID don't appear to be following the same upward trajectory. Would you say that the vaccination programme seems to be having the desired effect?
Apparently so. I suppose the mixed bag that you refer to is a reflection of just how tricky things are at the moment. I think Nicola Sturgeon has said that at the moment it's critical. You know, what we do at the moment is going to depend on how we continue and whether we manage to get to meet the July 19th and the August 9th easing of restriction dates. But yes, I mean, I'm lucky enough to be able to say that I've had both vaccinations. And
Myself.
Yeah, and remember those little drop-down menus when you're filling in a form and it's what age group are you? I remember I used to be, quite near the top in the younger age groups, but now I have to scroll down and down and down and down and down to get to my age group. So I suppose it's a turnaround that now it's people that are younger than me that are.
Do you think, Brian, there's any significance in what Mr. Youssef was saying about the highest numbers of cases apparently happening in between the ages of 18 and 40? Does that say anything to us about the behaviour of young adults, do you think?
I'm guessing that you're making a reference to the recent football matches, the Euro.
Possibly. One of many sort of events and sort of large crowds gathering to celebrate things.
Yeah, there's been a few over the summer, haven't there? But most recently, with the Euro, Scots going to London for the big football match against England. And again, I'm not a football fan, and so it's not for me to say that they shouldn't have travelled. It's good that they were able to travel. It shows that things are moving in the right direction. If COVID figures were as high as they were back in lockdown last year, then there's no way that they would have been allowed to go. So it's good that they were. But I couldn't help but thinking, it's good that they had a good time. I couldn't help but thinking somebody's going to have to pay in terms of COVID infections.
There would be some effect from it, you think?
I kind of think so, yeah.
With the vaccination rollout accelerating now, and then in the intervening time between now and the 19th of July, and ultimately, I suppose, the 9th of August, we'd hope that all of these younger adults in Scotland will be vaccinated, hopefully by the end of this month, and certainly by the beginning of August. Do you think that, based on that, the fact that almost everybody will have been vaccinated who's an adult, is there a case, do you think, for us continuing to vaccinate further down the age groups into children and young, kids pre sort of senior school level? Do you think we should go down that far down the age groups?
I would hesitate to say yes, it would. I'm not an expert. I'm not an epidemiologist, if that's the correct word. But for me, it just seems to be common sense that the more people that are vaccinated, regardless of age, then the better our chances are that you're less at risk. And I would even maybe go as far as to say that the same would go for. There's no point in people here in Scotland or within the UK vaccinating ourselves. But because until everybody globally is vaccinated, then we're all still at risk to new variants and the like. So not even age restrictions, but I would say geographical.
So there's obviously many months to go yet before other countries catch up to the West in terms of the levels of coronavirus vaccinations. Well,
yes, and I think that's why.
At the current levels we're hearing, it will be several years, in fact, before the rest of the world catches up to us. So we could be living with this for some considerable time.
Yes, which explains also why the First Minister is saying that it's critical that we move cautiously at this stage. It's to have come this far and then to move out too quickly and maybe reduce the number of vaccinations, I think would be a big mistake personally, I think.
Okay. Well, listen, Brian, let's leave that there just now and move on to our next story this evening, and that is that Dominic Raab's mobile phone number has apparently been freely available for the last 10 years. A report in The Guardian has said that the private mobile number of the Foreign Secretary, Dominic Raab, has been online for at least 11 years, raising concerns that the security services, just weeks after the Prime Minister's number, was also revealed to be accessible to anyone. Raab's number was discovered using a Google search. It appears to have been online since before he became an MP in 2010 and remained after he became Foreign Secretary and First Secretary of State, the de facto Deputy Prime Minister, in 2019. The webpage showing the number also contained other personal details for Raab. It has since been removed and the number no longer appears online or via Google. The Foreign Secretary has previously been warned of the cyber security threat posed by rogue states. In April, it emerged that Boris Johnson's personal mobile could be found at the bottom of a press release and had been online for 15 years, raising questions over why the confidentiality of senior politicians' contact details was not thoroughly investigated. The former UK National Security Advisor, Peter Ricketts, said that the breach regarding Dominic Raab's number showed that more attention must be paid to online security. You would expect, wouldn't you, Brian, that somebody with as senior a position as a Foreign Secretary would not have his details, least of all his mobile phone number, freely available online. Did you find this shocking when you heard this story today, that such a piece of information as valuable as that was so easily accessible?
If I'm honest, I don't think I was shocked, Gordon. I don't know. Call me a cynic, but I simply can't even see what difference it would make if you gave me Dominic Raab's phone number because I had a problem that I wanted to contact him about to maybe get something sorted. I don't think that the number that's published, the number that's out there, is going to be the number that's the most important one. Mm-hmm. Would he answer my call? I doubt it very much. I'm sure, just as it's been shown that members of the cabinet, they don't use their work email for work matters, and so I can't see why they would use their work mobile for work matters either.
So they can be secretive when they want to hide something from us, but when they don't want to hide something from us, they're wide open to access.
Yes, I mean, I can understand the security issues if he was to have a conversation on that mobile phone when the number's known, then it could be listened into. But again, I'm sure that number will
maybe that number was just defunct and it had just been left as a dead account.
Even if it's still active, because that is his work mobile, mm-hmm. I just don't think it's going to be the most important number.
You would expect... It was his personal mobile phone number. I mean, you would have expected somebody as important as Mr. Raab to have declared this to the security services so that they could monitor that line, and you would expect surely that MI5, MI6 would be listening in to anybody attempting to phone him or contact him on that number.
Yes, again, call me a cynic. I just, forgive me if I hope I'm not speaking out of order here, but I just don't think they just cannot be trusted. And so with things like contact details, to answer your question, I wasn't shocked at all. And how big a problem is it? I think there are probably bigger problems to do with how they communicate with the cabinet, how they communicate with each other and with other important figures in the world.
Because it is relatively easy, isn't it, to get hold of an unregistered mobile phone, a so-called burner phone, and use it for wherever you like. And I'm not saying that Mr. Raab is doing that, but mobile phones are not necessarily the most secure ways of communicating, are they?
No. And just how many times have you seen somebody using a mobile phone and then another mobile phone will go off and the person says, oh, hold on a minute, and they get out their second mobile and they're having two conversations. Obviously, that's got nothing to do with Dominic Raab. But I just...
So you think maybe this is a known story?
Yes. It's really not the biggest problem, I think, that we're facing as a nation at the moment. So it certainly wasn't the most shocking thing that I read today.
Okay, well, perhaps it is just another one of the Tories' many security lapses. There seem to have been a few of those recently, including some secret documents that were scattered across the street in England recently. Anyway, shall we move on? And Ian Blackford has called for an investigation into the Tories' abuse of COVID contracts. The SNP has written to Cabinet Secretary Simon Case calling for an independent investigation into the abuse of emergency COVID contracts by UK government ministers to conduct political research for the Tory constitutional campaigning. In an urgent question to the House of Commons, Ian Blackford MP said an inquiry was essential to get to the bottom of the blatant misuse of public money after High Court evidence revealed that Michael Gove had used £560,000 of emergency COVID contract money publicly funded to tackle the pandemic and save lives to undertake political research on attitudes to the UK Union. The SNP Westminster leader also called for the UK government to publish the publicly funded research so that taxpayers can see what money has been spent on. Michael Gove has already been found to have acted unlawfully in awarding a £560,000 emergency COVID contract to the market research firm Public First, owned by long-term associates James Frayne and Rachel Wolfe, who both formerly worked for Mr. Gove. Earlier this month, the High Court judge, Mrs. Justice O'Farrell, ruled that it gave rise to apparent bias and was unlawful. Evidence published in the High Court judgment on the Good Law Project versus the Minister for the Cabinet Office revealed that the services provided by Public First under the emergency COVID-19 contract were extended in July 2020 on the urgent orders of Michael Gove to include qualitative research into attitudes to the UK Union. Now, the way this is worded, Brian, you would be forgiven for thinking that this was something kind of a wide-ranging survey on British attitudes to the Union, but it's not, is it? This is specifically about Scottish people's attitudes to the Union, I believe, that Mr. Blackford is aiming his comments at. Has there been, do you think, an attempt by Mr. Gove here to do some secret polling, but secret polling at our expense?
Yes, and if I could just maybe springboard into this answer off of my answer to the previous question, this is, to me, is much more worrying, much more shocking than having a minister's mobile phone number. The amount of money that seems to have been spent on these polls is just staggering. I mean, we've all seen people, private individuals have had fundraisers or crowdfunders to carry out their own polls here in Scotland, and they're usually just asking for single figures, just a few £1,000, £5,000-6,000 is all they need. But this is like over half a million £560,000 spent on polling.
There must be an awful number of polls involved in that for £500,000. It's
incredible. And I understand that the government says that this was because during COVID, the regional governments and devolved governments were diverging in how they tackled the virus, and they had to find out how that might affect, what we should do to tackle the virus. That kind of seems quite plausible, but if that really was the only reason that they were carrying out that, then they should quite freely be willing to publish the results. As you say, it's taxpayers' money, so why not let the taxpayers know what they found out? There's definitely, I would say, there's something that they're not letting us know for some reason.
Do you think it's significant that it was Michael Gove who was ordering these polls, given his connection to the so-called, what used to be known as the Union Unit, which I believe has now been disbanded, but this is a part of government which is specifically given over to trying to protect the Union and to try and promote the Union, that Michael Gove, as shall we say, a Scot, in inverted commas, has been given the job here of monitoring what's going on in his home country, which of course he seems to play no part in anymore. Is it significant? Do you think it's coming from Mr. Gove? If it had come from anywhere else, would it have looked as suspicious as it does?
I don't know, but maybe if I can find his mobile number, I can give him a call and ask him.
That's a very good point, Brian. Yes. Maybe it's available online somewhere. We must check that later on.
Yes, I think the fact that his name comes up in correspondence or in discussions about this, again, I think is very telling.
Is there any danger, do you think, that Mr. Gove will ever publish the results of this polling in response to Mr. Blackford's demands?
Not willfully, not without
a court order,
some
perhaps.
effort. Yes, and I mean, haven't there been? I know it's a different poll different polling that we've found out about, but Tommy Sheridan, I think, has had some success there, hasn't it? And we're waiting for the government to release information that they found from polling previously. But I don't think they're the same. I think that's other polling, but they could be connected.
The British media particularly seems extremely keen to publish polling when it shows independent support is falling.
Yes, and I think it's true. I mean, we all know that governments do carry out polling from time to time, and it could influence policy. That does seem straightforward, or it does seem plausible. But as I say, if there's no malice aforethought, then they should be quite happy just to release this information. That we have paid for it, and so.
The Freedom of Information Act should come into play, you would think, because the public good is involved here, and it's public money that's been spent to acquire this information, yeah?
Yes, and again, if they refuse to publish it, then one cannot help but come to the conclusion that they have something to hide. And yes, it doesn't look. Again, it just shows that I think that it would be unwise to trust the current Westminster government.
Well, that's assuming any of us do. Anyway, let's move on. Speaking about the current Westminster government, and there have been calls for Boris Johnson to U-turn on the settled status deadline. With 1 day to go until the settled status deadline, the SNP has called again on Boris Johnson to scrap the deadline. Speaking ahead of the UQ, the SNP's immigration spokesperson, Anne McLaughlin MP, said that with so many warning of the dangers of June the 30th deadline, and with so many yet to apply and to complete their application process, or who are simply waiting on a decision, it's vital that the Prime Minister U-turn on this arbitrary deadline. Ms McLaughlin said that ploughing ahead with this cliff edge poses huge risks, not just to the EU nationals who've contributed to our society and helped to prop the country up during the global pandemic, but also to Scotland's NHS and its economy. Access to the labour market is a real concern. Now, we've heard quite a lot about this, Brian, over the last few days and weeks, that the Scottish Government particularly has been very vocal in making it plain to anybody from the EU who's working in Scotland that they really have to get this done before this deadline, or risk possibly being deported from Scotland. Is there, do you think, any chance at all that the Prime Minister would give any credence to this idea of relaxing the deadline to allow more EU nationals to complete the process? Or is it just going to be a cut-off, as it always seems to be in the UK?
I fear it's going to be the latter. Again, it just makes me. I won't tell you what it makes me feel or what I think. But
you can be honest as you like, Brian, as long as we can go out before the watershed.
But seriously, I would like to think that the Prime Minister would be able to see the sense in extending the deadline for this. Why not? We're still going through the pandemic at the moment. Not everybody is maybe back at work. I don't know how many people from the civil service are at their desks or working from home, or how many people are off because they have COVID, or I've got no idea about those kinds of details of figures. But it just, there's so much at stake for these people post-Brexit in a pandemic. It would just be the kind and humane thing to do, to simply extend the deadline, take the pressure off these people, and give them a chance to get things sorted.
Because the other thing that sprang to mind when I read this story at first, Brian, was the fact that so many of our NHS staff are Europeans who've come to work in our NHS because they revere the NHS here, because it doesn't exist in many other countries. A taxpayer-funded NHS like ours is something a lot of countries aspire to. So many medics come to the UK to work in our service. And for them to be sort of arbitrarily tossed out simply because they didn't meet a deadline seems remarkably short-sighted, considering that these people are the very ones who have saved so many thousands of lives over the last year and a half. And it strikes me as not only are we going to lose the medical staff, but we would also be losing an awful lot of our hospitality staff as well, at a time when all of the holiday destinations in Scotland are about to open up. Surely this is crazy.
I agree, and I think it's not only about people would maybe have to leave the country and go back to their original country of birth. I think it will make a huge difference to, from the very next day, to people who are still here living in Scotland. It will affect whether you can rent a flat or a room, and find accommodation. If you're in the process of applying for a job, and there will come a point, if you're successful in that interview, they will then say, can you show me your passport, or can you show me the document that shows that you're eligible to work in this country? All of that will be gone the very next day. What that shutter comes down, and so it's an incredible amount of risk to take. And as you say, at a time when we need these people, it's not as if
they're the enemy. They're not illegal migrants.
No,
who came here perfectly legally, and they're working and paying taxes.
Yes, they've chosen to live here, and we should welcome that and respect that and treat people accordingly. And I think it's a shocking indictment if they do not extend the deadline.
Well, we'll just have to hope, Brian, that something gives, and maybe somebody in Boris Johnson's group of advisors gives them some good advice. Anyway, let's move on. Our next story, and that is that a cut to universal credit could pull the rug out from under thousands of young carers. A new report has found that young carers in Scotland are being pushed into poverty, and Tory plans to cut universal credit could push them even further. The University of the West of Scotland Oxfam report praised Scottish Government's Young Carers Grant as an important resource, as many young carers reported that it allowed them to have a disposable income. In its conclusions, the report recommends that the UK Government does not implement the planned cuts to universal credit in October 2021 and maintain the £20 uplift. Last week, the Scottish Government introduced legislation to double the carers allowance supplement in December, further supporting those that need it. Now, contrast these two announcements, Brian. The British Government is going to cut the funding for young carers at the time when they need it most, coming into the winter months. The Scottish Government, by comparison, is putting in place a carers allowance supplement because they know that these young carers are going to need that extra support. Which of the two governments do you think people are going to support over the coming months?
Oh, let me think about that. What can I say? I mean, again, it's just shocking the difference in approach between the two governments and the two administrations. And it seems such a tiny amount, £20. I mean, £20. It's like, and yet that could make a huge difference to someone's income, and I cannot help thinking about how this then relates to things like the use of food banks. And in past months, we've seen Conservative MPs and MSPs proclaiming the fact that they now have more than one food bank in their local community, as if it's a good thing.
As if it's an achievement.
Yes, and I'd like to say, I mean, food banks are not amenities.
They're signs of desperate poverty.
Yeah, yes, it's like they're a disgrace, and to cut universal credit is going to mean people are going to have to use things like food banks even more than they do already, and for a country that is supposed to be one of the biggest economies in the world, for such a small, insignificant amount as £20. Yes, Westminster should definitely follow Holyrood's lead and take a leaf out of Holyrood's book, I think.
Well, it's perhaps just as well the Scottish Government is keeping its eye on the situation and is putting something in place for the winter months when they anticipate this cut coming along. If you're able to choose which side of the border you would rather live on, then this is a really good reason to be pleased. And this, of course, is with the limited powers that the Scottish Government has.
Yes, they do their best
to increase benefits to people who really need them. Imagine what we could do if we had all of the powers to increase benefits to those who need them. Anyway, let's move now to travel restrictions. And the travel restrictions to Manchester, Salford and Bolton are to be lifted. A temporary travel restriction between Scotland and parts of northwest England is to be lifted. The current rules on travel between Scotland and Manchester and Salford, which came into effect on the 21st of June, will be eased at midnight tonight. The travel restriction on Bolton, in place since the 24th of May, is also easing. However, restrictions will remain in place in relation to travel between Scotland and the area of Blackburn and Darwin Borough Council, which continues to experience concerning case rates of the more transmissible COVID-19 Delta variant. The arrangements affecting that area will be reviewed next week. As with all measures, local authorities have been made aware of the changes. Now, there was some, I think, perhaps unjustified criticism of the Scottish Government by Andy Burnham, the Manchester Labour mayor, last week about the targeting of his particular city for these restrictions, as though it had been some kind of deliberate act to disenfranchise the people of Manchester. But of course it wasn't, was it? It was because the variant is high both in Salford Manchester, but it's also high in Scotland, and having people flowing in both directions was, on the face of it, seemed a stupid idea, a very dangerous idea, would cause it to spread further. Do you think that this issue is being politicised, not just by the Conservative Party, but now by the Labour Party?
I suspect it may well be. I hesitate to say outright whether it is or not, but I can't help thinking that there's a good possibility that it is. It's one of those kind of bittersweet isn't quite the right expression, but it's one of those situations where I think it's maybe a good sign that the fact that travel restrictions are easing means that we're doing well when it comes to eradicating the virus or dealing with the virus. But at the same time, as the First Minister said, this period is critical, and so I would say that if you don't have to travel, then just
don't take the risk.
Yes, yep. It's the transmissibility is much higher with this variant that we have to be worried about. I'm just constantly losing the thread of what you were saying. Whether it was political on Mr. Burnham's
whether the
part.
Labour Party is jumping on the bandwagon of trying the SNP bad story about how they're being singled out for special ill treatment by the Scottish Government.
I can understand how he feels. You know, it kind of like there was a ring of truth to it when he accused the First Minister of treating his constituency the same way that Westminster treats Holyrood. And, you know, he's not wrong in that sense, in the way that Westminster treats Holyrood. But it's two different things. I mean, a metropolitan borough and
a whole country,
and a devolved administration of a whole country, exactly, are two completely different things. And I believe someone did point out when they met to kind of try and resolve the issue behind the scenes, the telephone conversation that was touted about at the time. Somebody did pinpoint the fact that Westminster was trying to get everybody to stay home, and meanwhile he was trying to encourage
people to travel,
and so there's a fundamental contradiction in his position, which again then does make you think, well, perhaps it's not just about controlling or containing the virus. You know, perhaps there is another slight hidden agenda,
a constitutional element to this. Do you think?
Yes, or he's thinking ahead to his career development, perhaps.
Okay. Well, I guess it remains to be seen. At least peace seems to have broken out between Manchester and Scotland so far. Hopefully that will continue. Unfortunately, the same can't be said for our next story. And Israel begins the demolition of Palestinian properties in Jerusalem's Silwan neighbourhood. Israel has demolished a Palestinian shop in East Jerusalem neighbourhood of Silwan today, triggering scuffles between police and protesters who accuse the authorities of discriminatory enforcement of building permits in the Holy City. Palestinians see East Jerusalem, which Israel captured in the 1967 war, as the capital of a Palestinian state. Israel claims that all of Jerusalem is for its capital, a status not recognised internationally, and has encouraged Jewish settlement of the predominantly Palestinian areas. A bulldozer escorted by Israeli police flattened Harbi Rajabi's butcher shop in the neighbourhood, which is overlooked by the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the third holiest shrine in Islam, and the most sensitive site in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The shop is of at least one of 8 properties that residents said were slated for demolition. The residents say that there have been for decades, even before 1967, sorry, I beg your pardon, let me read that again. The residents say many have been there for decades, even from before 1967. The authorities have earmarked the land for a park and say that the shops and homes have been built illegally. Palestinians in Silwan say that it is near impossible to get building permits. They see demolitions as designed to drive them out of Jerusalem. Palestinian medics said that 13 people were injured in today's confrontations in Silwan. Police said that 2 officers were hurt by stone throwers and that 3 people were arrested for disorderly conduct and assault. There seems to be no end to provocations in, I was going to say in Palestine, but I mean it is, I guess, in Jerusalem, in East Jerusalem. And the Israelis seem to pay no heed whatsoever to international outrage when it comes to doing this kind of thing. But surely this is a form of, well, physical ethnic cleansing. Would you say that was a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think I would, and I think that it's a heartbreaking situation. Um, Again, Israeli authorities can cite things like planning permission, and there may well be some truth to that. But the way in which they seem to go about and handle these issues, it's just it's beyond belief. And I did see a tweet go by earlier on, which I think was connected where not in Jerusalem but in other parts of the country, where the Israelis have made another land grab on a piece of Palestinian land. Not only have they then taken that land to build settlements on, but they've dug up what were Palestinian olive trees, ancient olive trees, and put them onto the back of a lorry and transported them. I'm assuming this is true, but I haven't checked it. But there were photographs in the tweet showing these olive trees being taken away to another part to be replanted in Israeli soil, and it just shows the extent to which the Israelis are just taking advantage because they have the power to do so, and without, when really they need to get together and try and come to some kind of resolution. But I've got no idea how they would do that. I don't know.
It seems that there's never any sort of end to these encroachments into traditional Palestinian areas and the eviction of the people who've lived there for decades. Do you think perhaps there's a case here for international peacekeeping troops being brought into this situation to try to separate the two factions and force them to the table, because nothing else seems to have worked?
I'm not sure about troops boots on the ground. A peacekeeping force may be the answer. Yeah, I think I would rather that certainly something needs to be done by the international community. We shouldn't just stand by and watch this happen. But how do we get them to sit down together and to get into a room together and lock the door until they come to some kind? And it just seems so unfair, the balance of power between the two states also, which means that for if you're Israeli or if you're the Israeli government, then might is right, and that just shouldn't be allowed. But I don't know what the answer is.
Well, I guess maybe there isn't an answer at the moment, but hopefully international pressure is about the only thing that might bring some peace to
Yeah, maybe perhaps the change in the president of the United States might
help
open up something. Yeah, the current president hopefully will be able to.
Well, America seems to be one of the few states that Israel listens to, and of course they depend on America largely for a lot of their income and their defences as well.
Yes, and the previous president, I think, probably has has played some part in the current situation. It certainly hasn't helped.
Okay, well let's leave Israel and Palestine for the moment and return closer to home. North Ayrshire MP has brought in a bill to extend bereavement leave to all. SNP MP Patricia Gibson has today presented a bill to the House of Commons to extend bereavement leave to all employees following the loss of a close family member or partner. Currently in the UK, there's no legal requirement for employers to grant bereavement leave, except for parents who have lost a child under 18 years old. After playing a key role in the successful cross-party campaign to secure paid bereavement leave for parents who lose a child under 18, the MP for North Ayrshire, Arran, immediately began work on her bereavement leave and pay bill, which aims to extend the statutory 2-week paid leave to all employers who suffer the loss. So all employees, I guess that means, who suffer the loss of a loved one. According to charity Sue Ryder, According to charity Sue Ryder, workplace grief costs the UK economy £23 billion a year. With 7.9 million people in employment, that's 24% of all employees having experienced a bereavement in 2019-2020. So there's obviously a need for this, Brian. It seems rather strange that there never has been a law which makes it mandatory for an employer to give bereavement leave to somebody who suffered a loss like this. It seems that there always should have been. It's one of those cases about why hasn't there been until now. What do you think? Will it happen? She's succeeded so far in getting this new bill for people who lose a child under 18. Surely that's a first step in the door, perhaps, towards this?
I hope so, and I would wish it every success. It sounds like an incredibly important bill. As you say, it's not something that, just because of personal circumstance, it's not something that I was aware of. And I would have thought, if you had asked me without hearing this news that what the situation was, I would have probably assumed that it would be the same with maternity leave, where you can have either the mother or the father, I think, I'm right in saying, can be eligible to take time off work when they've had a baby. And so you would think maybe that similar would apply for something as important as when you lose a loved one, someone close to you.
Yes, you seem to be able to get time off when there's a source of great joy, but when there's a source of bereavement and trauma, you don't get any time off, you don't get any paid leave. It just seems to be the wrong way. Well, not the wrong way around, but it should be a balance, surely, between the beginnings of life and the end of life.
Yes, and again, I'm hoping that the bill will be successful, because once again, it would show that these are the kind of changes that we need to make to show what kind of country we can be, and the fact that those changes weren't already in place from Westminster legislation, I think, shows the difference between Holyrood and Westminster. But going back to the most important thing, which is when somebody loses a loved one, it's just. It just seems like the right thing to do. It just feels right almost on every level.
It's one less thing for that person to worry about.
Yes, and I mean, there were financial figures quoted in your report there, but it seems like it's well worth...
£23 billion a year it costs the UK economy, according to the report, and 7.9 million people in the last year have been affected by it. That's a tremendous number of people.
Yes, and so if legislation could be put in place to kind of do something to help those people at that time, then why not? Again, to me, it seems like a no-brainer. It's common sense almost in a way.
Yeah, you would expect, the government's first duty is to protect its citizens, yes, including their health and, I guess, their mental health and well-being as well.
Yes, and just in terms of humanity, why not?
It makes no sense.
Yes,
yeah,
I would vote for it if I was.
Okay.
I would urge my MSP to vote for it also.
Well, let's hope so, Brian. We're going to move on now. And a question, should children continue to be vaccinated throughout the coronavirus outbreak? Commenting on today's childhood immunisation statistics, the Public Health Minister Marie Todd reminded all parents and carers of the importance of continuing to get their children vaccinated during the coronavirus outbreak. Ms Todd said, "I'm pleased to see that children immunisation rates across Scotland remain high." Now, I believe we're talking here about immunisation for other diseases and not COVID, just so we're clear. Yep. The normal vaccinations which children get in the early parts of their lives. So reflecting both the hard work and the commitment of our colleagues in the NHS and the recognition among parents and carers of the benefits of vaccination. She said, "I want to remind all parents and carers of the importance of getting the children vaccinated throughout the coronavirus COVID-19 outbreak. Your GP or health board will still be available to do this, and it's advised that you keep these." So this is, I guess, something which has been forgotten about, Brian, in the midst of the pandemic. We're all talking about vaccinations for COVID, but yet we forget that all these youngsters who have been born and are growing up in Scotland and elsewhere in the UK still need to have other vaccinations for polio, for whooping cough, for measles, rubella. All of these things are still going on. I think that perhaps has slipped our attention in recent months.
Yes, and you can maybe understand why. I mean, but because the pandemic has been so severe, and the number of deaths is just incredible from that. So you can kind of imagine why that has kind of grabbed all of our attentions. But it's true, and even when in the press, when they do talk about other vaccinations, then people tend to, when they're talking about COVID, they'll very quickly move on to flu, and they'll say, well, because everybody's been sanitising their hands and washing their hands more regularly and staying indoors, and so the number of flu's just kind of disappeared this year, and yet so that's almost like implying that, well, that's another vaccination that we don't have to bother about, when really, yes, you're right, there are other diseases that...
But of course, when the vaccinations are fully completed for COVID-19, and the restrictions are lifted, we go back to interacting with each other socially again, then the risk of these other viruses and other infections comes back. And so surely it's common sense, isn't it, that people should, be vaccinated against these common illnesses anyway and get their booster shots when they need them.
Yes, and I realise that there are often medical reasons why somebody can't have a vaccination, but which is fine, but they can be exempt. But as I said earlier on in relation to COVID, if there's a vaccination available, then I would say take it. Otherwise, you're leaving yourself exposed, not just yourself, but others. People that maybe can't have the vaccination. And I wouldn't be surprised, I suppose, as we move through this pandemic, the COVID pandemic, and then we get towards the end, then we'll find as we look around, as we're coming out of this pandemic, that there are flare-ups of other diseases that we've kind of, as you say, we've taken the eye off the ball. So fingers crossed, then that maybe this is a timely reminder.
It sounds a bit more like it's not so much the government or the NHS that's taken its eye off the ball, but it's us and us as parents who have forgotten that we might have youngsters who need vaccinating against other things, and therefore we've been sort of totally taken up with COVID. But I'm just hearing actually in my earpiece that the numbers of vaccinations for children for childhood diseases actually has been up. It's been consistent. So it's consistent. So if it's consistent, then I guess parents are still taking it seriously, and maybe the government is just wanting to remind us all to keep doing this.
I'm so old and I don't have children. In my day, I think it was almost, it wasn't obligatory, but I think it was almost automatic.
You kind of expected it, didn't you?
Yeah, the school would say Jags next week, and
everybody would get it because nobody wanted to get the disease.
Yeah, and you just rolled up your sleeve. And it's free. Exactly, and everybody seemed to realise the value of it. Just going back to COVID vaccinations, I think the fact that we've done the older generations and people in care and moving down through younger people again I just would say that just vaccinate everybody
against everything. Yes, protect everyone against everything.
I can't imagine the First Minister or
it's interesting
putting it that way, but yes,
apparently. We've been hearing from this report that they're actually pleased, the government is pleased with the current levels of vaccination and that people have stuck with it. So let's hope it continues. One thing that interested me about this, Brian, was the fact that we've concentrated so heavily on the older generation for the last year and a half. It's almost like we forgot we had kids, like we forget that there are children there as well. There have been various people have been saying that they don't think that we should be vaccinating children against COVID-19. We should relax the rules for them in school. I'm not sure about the vaccinating them against COVID thing, but certainly if they are vaccinated, then they could, I suppose, go back to socialising as usual at school.
I think that's the main reason for vaccination, is that it makes it safer to as Priti Patel would say, to mix and mingle, and to get back to not having to deal with restrictions. Again, even I know I keep going. Forgive me, I keep bringing it back to COVID again. But with the new variant, the older variants, it didn't affect young people and school children, which is why they were allowed to open schools up. But it seems that, if I'm right, it seems that the new variant is.
Seems to infect everybody, regardless of age.
Yes, and children are catching it. So to stop them bringing it home and spreading it. So let's vaccinate. Yeah, absolutely. But again, internationally, not just here in the UK.
Do you think, as a result of COVID, Brian, that there might be a little hangover in society where we do think a little bit more about how close we get to people, that we do wash our hands a bit more frequently, and perhaps many people will have to continue wearing masks in shops and things like that for some months or years to come. Do you think that perhaps that behaviour might change permanently and become a kind of part of our daily routine?
I think it might, and yet the way you put it, it just reminds me of, if I'm watching an old movie or some old news footage of some kind of political event, and you can see how close people are, and without any care or concern in the world, and you look at it and you think, oh, it'd be great. It would be great to go back to that, but also we've probably been taking these risks unknowingly, because
We
a
never thought
virus
it would
appears
happen.
before anybody knows, and then it
Yeah.
spreads. Yeah, so maybe people will stop shaking hands in the future. I don't know.
I guess we'll just have to wait
We'll
and
have to
see
wait
as the
and
years
see.
roll by. Anyway, on to our final story this evening, and back home again, this time in Edinburgh, and supporting Edinburgh's festivals. Producers and venues have been awarded £1 million to support the safe return of live events at this year's Edinburgh International Festival and the Edinburgh Fringe. The Scottish Government funding will help to create outdoor performance spaces and mitigate the additional costs faced by producers due to the pandemic. It's been distributed between the Edinburgh International Festival and 9 fringe producers, alongside a further £300,000 from the City of Edinburgh Council. The Culture Secretary, Angus Robertson, said, "Edinburgh's festivals are a highlight on the international culture calendar and were sorely missed last summer. I'm determined to do everything within my power to support the return of these globally significant events and the benefits which they bring to Scotland in terms of tourism and trade." And I'm sure you'll agree, Brian, that not having an Edinburgh festival last year left a colossal hole in the entire events calendar of Scotland. It was almost like a almost fatal blow to the arts in Scotland. The Scottish Government trying to help here by providing enough funding to put in place enough measures to mitigate the problems caused by COVID restrictions. Do you think that, well, I'm hoping that we're right here, that COVID will be under control by the end of August, by the time that the festival rolls around, which is usually, the last week in August, isn't it? Last weekend in August.
Yes.
Will we get there in time, do you think?
Oh, fingers crossed. It's true. I mean, to host the biggest arts festival in the world here in Scotland is an incredible achievement, and so it would be great to see it happen again this year. I suppose it's good, harking back to what the First Minister said today, the very fact that the vaccination is working. There's a new variant which more and more people are catching, which means there's more people going into hospital, but those people are younger who haven't been vaccinated. They're spending less time in hospital, and when they are hospitalised, they're less likely to go into intensive care. So again, I suppose it's balancing that, balancing those two things, the number of people with COVID in hospital versus...
So they're managing the load on the NHS.
Yes, it's like
whilst keeping the economy rolling along.
That tricky line. How many people with COVID can we manage and yet still have something like the international festival go ahead? It seems it's possible.
Because I think that perhaps the only thing which might alter the quality or the numbers of people coming into the festivals is still going to be restrictions on travel. With many of the international acts obviously flying in from other countries, are obviously going to have to be pretty careful about how those artists and individuals are treated when they get here. I'm not sure whether they will still need to quarantine at all. I suppose it depends which country they're coming from. But I would imagine that the festival organisers will have very carefully thought this out and looked, at acts from countries which they know are fairly safe and tried to make sure it was.
Yes, but it's not only COVID. With Brexit and the costs for people, artists and musicians, roadies, handlers, transportation, lorry drivers. If they're coming from abroad, then because of Brexit, their costs have gone up.
And then you add COVID to that.
Add COVID to that. And so maybe, if the festival does take place this year, maybe it'll be a very different one to previous festivals.
It would be interesting, Brian, I think. Do you think maybe perhaps, let's say that COVID is under control and that they've managed to relax most of the travel restrictions for the artists coming into Scotland? It would be interesting to see just how much Brexit affects them thereafter, because we're not yet clear of the fog of COVID yet. It's not cleared away. We can't really see the damage fully that Brexit might have done to this industry. Do you think perhaps this might be the time that we see it when this Edinburgh Festival happens this year?
Possibly. It's hard to say because it's like trying to foretell the future, isn't it?
Sorry, it was an unfair question.
No, it's not
Brian.
unfair at all.
I'm asking you to speculate.
No, not at all. But I mean, I wonder if maybe it will take place, hopefully. But even when I'm saying that it'll look different, maybe there'll be more homegrown acts, less international acts.
I think it may be scaled down in the numbers of venues as well.
Yeah, less indoors and more outdoors. That kind of thing. There have been tests, haven't there, with events where there are lots of people, and then they've monitored the number of people that come down with COVID.
Yeah,
and they're all apparently looking optimistic.
Because the audiences, well, traditionally the audiences for the Edinburgh Festival are a mix of Scottish, other British nationals, I suppose, from the rest of the UK, and whatever foreign tourists happen to be in Edinburgh at the time. So we get quite a mix of people. You would imagine that kind of melting pot might produce a little spike in the COVID figures, but I guess we'll have to see.
And I wonder if I was an Edinburgh resident, I know that I've got friends through there, and I think they don't always enjoy the festival as much as people from outside. Yeah, so maybe they'll be hoping that it'll be a little bit more restrained this year, because of both Brexit and COVID, so that they can use the city without too much inconvenience to themselves in their daily lives. But it's an incredible event. I mean,
it would signal really the firing the starting gun again for the arts in Scotland, for theatres reopening.
We need to at least get ready. I mean, it's not
for
sort
ballet,
of
for opera, for pantomime, for goodness sake, one of Scotland's biggest theatrical success stories to start up again. Something my producer's saying, "Oh no, it isn't in my ear." But anyway. Oh no, she's now saying no. Yes, it is. That's it.
He's behind you. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Anyway, listen. Before we get any more terrible jokes about the pantomime season, we have actually just about run out of time for this evening. So it just remains for me to remind you, first of all, that we're still in the middle of our crowdfunder. We still need your help desperately to raise enough money to start paying our staff and to hire more journalists and more presenters. So if you'd like to become a regular contributor to Broadcasting Scotland, you can do that by following the instructions at the bottom of your screen just now. Anyway, that is about it from me this evening. It just remains for me to thank my colleague Brian, and hopefully, Brian, you'll be back in the studio with me again at some point in the future. I hope you've enjoyed your evening with us this evening.
It's not been too bad, so thank you for your patience with it.
You're most welcome. Anyway, from all of us here at Broadcasting Scotland and Scotland at 7 Studios, a very good night to you.
How do you mean no more commission?
Well, no one in Scotland can commission an idea. If I went to BBC Scotland and I said, I've got this great idea for a sitcom, I've got this brilliant idea for a drama, there isn't one person in Scotland that can okay it unless it goes through London.
Good morning and welcome to another edition of Full Scottish. What's happening today?
Hello and welcome to the Full Scottish here on Broadcasting Scotland.
Scotland is going to be an independent country.
That desire for independence is ever stronger than perhaps it was in 2014. So there's an obligation that we've got to give leadership to that campaign. That's what Nicola Sturgeon, as our First Minister, has been doing.
My feeling about Boris Johnson is he can't be trusted on anything.
That is now and forever will be known as the rape clause.
I'm old enough to remember going into Europe in '73, and I remember how much of a razor's edge that was balanced on. And I think we made it by 53%, if I remember correctly, for going in. And ever since that time, England particularly has been pretty much schizophrenic, down the middle about whether it felt British or whether it felt European. And that schism, that crack has remained throughout English society ever since.
Scotland means business. Scotland's voice won't be stilled, it won't be silenced, it has to be heard.
The work that's been done by Broadcasting Scotland in giving community activists, yes activists, Scottish activists a platform other than the traditional media outlets.
Well, I think last